There are some rules in D&D that just don't make sense to me. I understand that it is a tabletop game at the end of the day, but the RPG part is in there for the storytelling aspect. So I like to think of all my players as humans plus. And if a human could do it, why can't my orc? I think all of us at one point or another have heard stories of a mother ripping a car off of her baby, or other crazy things like a man fighting a bear. When we have adrenaline rushes and we're in tense and stressful situations, we can do crazy things. Now imagine if that power was honed. Sure, you can battle and cast spells, and we have stuff in place for all of that, but oh man, there is nothing more infuriating than being 5 feet, 1 block away from saving your friend. Or when you lose an NPC who is beloved, but you don't have any diamonds on you. I said in a previous video that I think death is really important to campaign and to a storytelling, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything always has to die. It's a magical world. We don't follow the story of Barb in Stranger Things more than a couple of episodes because she didn't survive. Our main characters, our players, should survive to an extent, and so should the friends that they love. Again, that's not to say that death isn't important. I have had players sacrifice themselves. I have killed players. There are times and there are places, though, when it comes to the art of storytelling. That brings me to the first home rule that I made for my table, which is a CPR roll. Once per day, per character, you can attempt CPR within a minute of death. Now, this goes for both NPCs or other player characters, but there are caveats. Whether a player succeeds or fails on their CPR roll, they take a point of exhaustion, and so does a person coming back from the brink of death. Anyone brought back using CPR also only takes 50% healing until their next long rest. Now, DC for the roll is at the discretion of the DM depending on death. If you have somebody who just got hit in the chest or the head really hard, it might be a lot easier to just, well, you can't tell by the way I am. But if somebody is severed in 2 pieces, stay alive. You're gonna have to explain to me what type of healers you have on the side dumping spells into them to get their body parts back together. Stay alive, or cauterized or anything like that before you even attempt a roll. And the DC is still going to be ridiculously high. But as far as the roll itself goes, there are 2 ways you can roll. Medicine can have proficiency. It can be a lot more specialized. Maybe your favorite teacher told you how not all wounds can be healed simply with magic, and taught you how to use CPR. Whereas with strength, I worked in the medical field long enough to know that sometimes if you are just stubborn, strong, have the endurance to just keep grief punching somebody in the chest, even without formal training, you might be able to bring them back. Now, it's still a long shot with CPR, but I think it's always good to have options for your players, especially when you come into like level 5 to 7 campaigns where you're good enough to do some healing, but some tables don't have a healer, or they don't want to waste their spell slots on an NPC, even though they love them, because they're more concerned for their friends. It definitely won't work for every table, but I feel like for storytelling tables like mine that are a lot more focused on the roleplay aspect of the TTRPG, it definitely gives a little bit of leeway. And in giving leeway, another one of the most frustrating things that I found as a player is when you hit your movement boundary and somebody is 5 feet away, they're right there, or you really have to do something that's further. I have heard of people who were trying to run to save their brother in the game, and they couldn't run an extra 10 feet. Now, what helped me fix that issue was not to abolish movement altogether, because having limitations are important. But once per day, my players can make a strength check to push past that movement boundary. The DC depends on how much further they're trying to get past it, and again, it is once per day, like per dawn, per long rest, however you'd like to manage it, but you can't just push your body to those limits all the time. But in those dire situations, they can make their roll, DC depending on how far they go, and if they want to go extra far and they roll a nat 20 on it, they'll take it. They can run their extra 10, 20 feet, but they're going to take a point of exhaustion for it. That way there's still those rules and punishments and consequences to your actions, but sometimes it is worth it to throw your player under the bus if it's to save another. Or to get the last shot on a BBG and save a lot more than just one other. Which brings me to what happens if they can't break that movement boundary, if CPR doesn't work, and their character is affected by the loss of another character or situation from their past. I find the human condition to be really intriguing, and I feel like it helps a lot with storytelling. And sometimes having effects that you can't necessarily predict also helps your table diversify. As somebody who is diagnosed with CPTSD, I look at my world and I think about how many traumatizing things happen to my players and the NPCs on even a daily basis. And maybe with weatherproofing or conditioning, they would get past it easier, but I still think there's things that are so upsetting that it should have a lasting effect. And that's where we bring in my trauma dice rules. Now, a DM should never ever tell their player, this has traumatized you and that is what it is for. No. This is a dice rule, let's say, that is for players who come to you and say, I really want to experience this character, I want to live in this character, or I have a character who is really affected by their past. This is an option to give them something more in depth. I find it's also really good for character growth. Some players need a little extra physical help with understanding and implementing character growth. And trauma dice is a great way to do that. Now, there are two aspects to this. One, what happens when somebody comes in contact with a reminder of that traumatic situation, and two, how they get over it. As far as the first part, when somebody comes in contact with something that would remind them of their past, such as their village burned down to blue flames, and when they come in contact with a similar blue flame, they roll 2 d4s. One of the d4s is a condition, the other is how long it lasts. If you roll a 1, then you immediately start attacking things in your general vicinity. Whatever is closest to you, you are attacking. In a blind rage, you see them as enemies, and you continue to attack them for however many turns are on the dice. If you roll a 2, you immediately freeze. Whatever you're planning on doing, you are now paralyzed. 3, you are feared by whatever it is, but not just a normal, you can't walk towards it. For the however many turns are on the dice, you have to use your total movement to get away from whatever it is that reminded you. And 4, nothing happens. It's not a bad day. Anytime you come in contact with one of these incidents, you get to also roll a d20 to see how well you handle it. Now, this is a conversation to have with your player and your DM as to what the starting DC is. The more traumatizing, the higher the DC. So if, for say, you start with a 20 as the DC, and you come across something that scares you, you roll, and if you get a 20, the next time you roll again, it is going to be a 19. And you continue to do that until you need to only roll a 1. And when you roll that, you're okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that your character is fully healed. It means that your character has learned and grown and experienced enough that they don't shut down in such a way. Now, in an ideal world, your player would be going through those motions themselves and being able to run it, but not everybody can get that into their character's head or is that mentally invested in their character. Again, this whole thing comes down to really being a catalyst for character growth and being given a physical way to see that. Another way that I use that countdown DC, though, is language learning. In long-form campaigns that last months to years, your players might only get a feat every 6 months to a year. There's not a lot of ways to learn a new language outside of that in the game, and I want to be able to give my players the option to learn more. Now, not every player is even going to be interested in learning more languages, but for those little bookworm characters who really want to experience the world in its written way, I allow them to learn languages they're interested in using that countdown dice method. The DC, again, depends on the player's experience. If a player grew up in a dwarven city, but they never learned Dwarvish, that's a little weird. It's gonna be a little bit easier to learn it. But if one of my players is like, I wanna learn Abyssal, and I'm like, you haven't even heard Abyssal. What? That's gonna be a high DC. Now, how do you get into the process of starting that? Well, when a player comes to me and says, I would like to learn this language, please, I start making a conscientious effort to include physical paper, that has word puzzles on them. Be it on my quest boards or they find it on a dead NPC, they're given that puzzle to solve at the table. In one way, it makes for more organic conversation as everybody is asking, what do we do? And they're going, oh, hold on, trying to figure out and decipher this puzzle. Once deciphered, they give it to me, and if they get the right answer, they get to make one of their language learning rolls. And similar to actually learning a language, the DC going down as they start to learn more and more makes a lot more sense with how you would learn a language through practice. The last of the heavier house rules that I have is a SCAR rule, which I always check in with my players about whether they're comfortable with that in session 0. At some point or another, I will make a video on how I handle my session 0s, but please, 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 please do a session 0. Session 0s are like icebreakers in marketing groups. It's weird, it's uncomfortable, but you always come out of it knowing each other and what is expected better. There has never been a downside to holding a session 0, especially for longer format campaigns. Sometimes a session 0 is literally just sending a checklist of comforts before a one shot, but please, 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 session 0. Now, the way that I handle scars is whenever somebody lands a nat 20 critical hit on a player, it has a potential to leave a scar. Right off the bat, I roll a d4 to see the severity. A 1, you're good, you're fine, no scar. 2 is a small scar. It's a nick on the side of your face or maybe on your shoulder that you could probably pass off as a birthmark if anybody even noticed it. 2 is a medium scar. It's something that, you know, you're not gonna be able to deny, but it's a more visible scar. Maybe it's a big burn down your arm or a slash over your eye. But 4 is a large scar. It's a noticeable one. It's like Zuko from Avatar. Then I roll a d8 to see what part of the body it's on. Head, arm, torso, legs, and whatever parts you would prefer at your table. You can use that d8 to kind of navigate, or a d6. Now, for some intense DMs, that is that. They get the scar and that's permanently on them. For me, campaigns where people feel a little, yes, but is there a way to get rid of it? I have a simple mending, but like for skin spell that you can find in almost any major city. Now, you may think that that takes away from the seriousness of it, but it's not necessarily always supposed to be serious. To me, scars are a way that people carry their stories and their experiences. And some players like that. Some players already are like, can I have my man have one white eye and a cool scar? So I would love for my players to be able to get those cool scars and stories right at the table. Now, the last 2 rules that I have for my table are minor compared to all those and much simpler in my opinion. It is how I handle sleep perception and how I handle nat 20s on disadvantage. As far as sleep perception goes, you cannot tell me that you have never stayed awake in bed all night and your body is resting, but you are getting minimal sleep. My partner sleeps like a rock. I'm pretty sure the world could be ending. He's not hearing absolutely anything. I, on the other hand, if my phone vibrates to a text message, I'm up, I'm awake, what's up, who needs me? And sometimes that can fluctuate, not necessarily even between people, but between nights. The way that I implement that at my table is that if somebody is sleeping and something is going on, whatever's going on rolls a stealth check, and they roll a perception check at disadvantage. And then they take their disadvantage roll or their passive perception, whichever is higher at that point. If you roll a nat 1, it doesn't matter if your passive perception is higher, you hear nothing. If you roll a nat 20, well, 2 20s? Yo, dog, you heard it all. You got your eyes closed in bed and you're still seeing it spiritually happening. I don't know, I just find not knowing what's going on in your sleep when you yourself are such a light sleeper that you know you would have heard somebody breaking into your room. Even if it is your character, you know it's possible. It's infuriating. But not more infuriating than getting a nat 20 on disadvantage. I feel like a nat 20 should, matter. And when you roll a 2 and a nat 20 and you're like, are you? So the way that I handle that is if you are rolling disadvantage and you get a nat 20, you get a flat 20 as that roll. It can be awesome in some cases where you did roll a 2 and you don't want that 2. But in other times it's still a little bit of a hindrance because having a flat 20 but no bonuses means that you could have rolled an 18 on disadvantage plus 8 proficiency and you would have still been golden, but flat 20 takes that out. So regardless, you're still getting a form of disadvantage even when it is good. And I've had more moments of the thank the gods I'm not taking that 2 than I have of, Somebody being like, but it would have been +8. Honestly, I think most of these rules have joined the table for the better. There's also a lot more rules that I have at my table, which other great DMs have made. But there's so many other people talking about that, I figured I would share the things that, you know, I created. All that being said, I am always looking for new ways to engage my players and to spice up my table a little bit. So if you have a homebrew rule that you absolutely love at your table, be it the DM or the player, leave it in the comments below. And if I find one that I'm not already using or I haven't tried before, I'm definitely going to steal it and use it at my table and let you guys know in a future video how that goes for me. So whether you want to grow with me as a DM, teach me something, or maybe learn something, don't forget to like and subscribe, and hopefully I'll see you in future videos. Bye! Staying alive, staying alive.